You know what's so amazing about humanity? It's that there is so many resources in the world. There are enough resources to feed everyone. There are enough resources to take care of everyone. And we kill each other. A couple of days ago, I was looking at an Al Jazeera documentary about the war in the Congo. And it was a very well directed documentary. It was like watching a movie. And you see these videos of these Congolese people fighting each other. You have government forces fighting rebel forces, and it's like Saving Private Ryan. It's like an African version of Saving Private Ryan. But then you look at all of the nature around the fighting. You look at the videos of these Congolese people walking around, taking care of their livestock, and it's just green. It's extremely luscious. You see these beautiful mountains just covered in green, covered in trees and plants and wild plants everywhere, and it's raining and it's wet and it's just thriving. And you can see the soil is dark and rich and it's so luscious. And you think, wow, what a beautiful country. You could feed so many people uh, from growing food in the Congo. You could feed a whole continent growing food in Africa, let alone the Congo. And here you are just watching people kill each other in this beautiful, lush country. It's surreal to me. It really is surreal to me. Instead of feeding the world, they're killing the world by killing each other. And you just look at this dark reality and you see that it just never really ends. It never really ends. Last night I was reading this book about the crisis in the Balkans in the 1990s. It's called Kosovo Crisis by Vojen Joksimovic. It's a very good book, I must say. I have been enjoying reading this book, and it has been quite informative. And Vojen Joksimovic, he talks about how the Germans supported the Croatian revolt against Yugoslavia. Croatia was a part of Yugoslavia, which was this multi-ethnic block of nations. You had, Croatia and Serbia and Montenegro and Slovenia, and they were all part of the same country called Yugoslavia. And in 1991, the Croatians revolted. They wanted to be free from Yugoslavia. They wanted to have their own independent country. And so the Croats revolted, and they had riots. And there were these violent demonstrations that were taking place in 1991. And they were basically people who were neo-Nazis that were involved. These were Ustasha. Ustasha were Croatian fascists who collaborated with the Germans during the Second World War, and they were some of the most sadistic butchers for the Nazis in the Third Reich. And they butchered hundreds of thousands of Serbs and Gypsies. I think altogether they murdered around 1 million or so people. And in the 1990s, there was still this spirit of the Ustasha, this spirit that admired the Ustasha. And you still have this in Croatia today. You have this amongst the Croatian diaspora in the United States and Canada today. So in the 1990s, the spirit was there. The Nazi spirit was there. And you had these violent demonstrations, and these Croatian nationalists were calling for the expulsion of all of the Serbs who were living within Croatia. Well, the Yugoslav government saw what was happening, and they, like any other country, knew that they had to intervene. They had to do a military intervention to prevent a revolution. So they commenced a military deployment, and the Europeans got involved, and the Europeans, led by Germany, told Yugoslavia that they needed to withdraw their soldiers back to their barracks and end the intervention. And they told the Croatians that they needed to suspend their pursuit for independence for 3 months. So it looked like the Germans were just being intermediaries for peace. They were trying to bring about peace, that they were being objective, and they were not being biased at all. They told the Yugoslav military, hey, stop the fighting, go back to your bases. They told the Croatians, stop pursuing independence for 3 months. We need to work on some kind of a compromise. We need to hash out a negotiation. We need to do negotiations. So for 3 months, the Croats did not move any further in their efforts for independence. And it looked like that negotiations were being done, that they were ongoing. But what was actually happening was that for those 3 months, weapons were being funneled into Croatia. And most of these weapons were coming from Germany, because the Germans were the biggest backers of Croatian independence alongside the Vatican and the United States. So for those 3 months, while it looked like the Germans were trying to hash out some kind of a peace agreement, the Germans were funneling in weapons into Croatia. There was this flow of arms going into Croatia. So it was a trick. It was deception. And in fact, the Germans were so heavily enthusiastic about Croatian independence that it actually worried the Americans. Because the Americans, they want to dominate the world. They don't want the Germans to have a huge, preponderating position. They don't want the Germans to have all the control in the Balkans. So the Americans began arming and training the Croatians, not only because the Americans wanted to dismantle Yugoslavia, but also because the Americans wanted to create a balance against Germany in the Balkans, against Germany gaining too much of a hegemony in the Balkans. The Americans did not want that at this time. It's very interesting that in the year 1988, just a few years before the outbreak of these violent demonstrations occurred in Croatia, there was a secret meeting between the Chancellor of Germany at the time, Helmut Kohl, and the President of Croatia, Franjo Tudjman. And in this secret meeting, Helmut Kohl agreed to back an independent Croatia. And the Germans kept this secret, and eventually it was revealed. But at the time, the Germans did not want information on that meeting being known to the public. And so there was this conspiracy taking place. And it's very interesting. The Germans backed the Croats in the Second World War against the Serbs with the hopes of destroying Yugoslavia. And the Germans continued this very mission after the Second World War. This secret meeting was between Franjo Tudjman and Helmut Kohl. Helmut Kohl he's a fascinating character, not because I like him, but because he really represented the reality. He reflected the reality of the German nationalist spirit continuing on, regardless of the fact that this was in the post-World War II era. Because you would think, well, World War II was over with, Germany had changed, but Helmut Kohl really disproves this sort of conventional idea, because there was a meeting between Margaret Thatcher and Helmut Kohl, and Margaret Thatcher recounted this meeting in an interview in 1991, I believe. And Margaret Thatcher stated in this interview that she had a meeting with Helmut Kohl in which Helmut Kohl told her that he did not want to recognize the borders of Poland that were established by the Allies after the Second World War. Helmut Kohl denied that this ever happened. He denied that he told Margaret Thatcher this, that that he refused to recognize Poland's borders. But this denial was really disproven by the fact that when Poland asked Helmut Kohl if he would, if he could vow that Germany would always respect the borders of Poland, Helmut Kohl refused to make this vow. Helmut Kohl refused to vow that Germany would always respect Poland's borders, which means that even after the Second World War, the Germans still wanted Poland. They still did not agree with what the Allies did. They still wanted to control Poland. And they still do. They still do. Look at the controversy between Poland and the European Union, really between Poland and Germany. Germany is upset with Poland because of its policies over its own judicial system. The Germans want the Poles to follow the judicial system of the EU. The Poles want to follow their own judicial policy. The Germans and the European Union are upset with Poland because of its stance against Sodom, for its stance in favor of traditional marriage, real marriage. And so you still see this tension going on between the Germans and the Poles. It's still there. And Helmut Kohl supported the Croatian revolt against Yugoslavia. So here, it's very interesting. Helmut Kohl refuses to recognize Poland's borders. Helmut Kohl refused to vow that Germany would always respect Poland's borders, which really meant that Germany still had this very spirit that possessed it during the Second World War. And Helmut Kohl and Germany backed Croatia against Yugoslavia with the hopes of destroying Yugoslavia, the very policy that it had during the Second World War, which really goes to show you that not much really changed. And looking at the story here, looking at the story of Germany and Croatia working against Yugoslavia, you see deception. So you start out in 1991, you have these riots going on in Croatia against Yugoslavia. The Croats want to see the expulsion of all of the Serbs. And then the Germans get involved and they say, well, let's give it 3 months of peace so that we can have some kind of a negotiation. During those 3 months, the Germans are secretly funneling in weapons into Croatia to support Croatia, to strengthen Croatia against Yugoslavia. Now, what does that remind us of? What does it remind us of? It reminds us of the Euromaidan and the Minsk Agreement. You had the Euromaidan, heavily Ukrainian nationalist movement against Russia. And they were against the ethnic Russians. And they were people screaming, if you are a Muscovite, you get the rope. If you are not a Russian, then jump. And all the people would jump. You had all of these, you had this very violent demonstration against Russia called the Euromaidan. And it led to a coup. It was a revolt. And then you had a war. And the Germans got involved. The Germans and the French got involved. And they brokered this agreement called the Minsk Agreement. And it was supposed to be a peace agreement. Well, what did Angela Merkel admit not too long ago? She said that the whole strategy of the Minsk Agreement was simply to buy time for Ukraine to strengthen itself against the Russians. That's what it was. Very similar to what happened in Yugoslavia. In Yugoslavia, you had anti-Serb, anti-Yugoslav demonstrations. You had the beginning of a war within Yugoslavia against the Croat rebels. The Germans got involved. They said, let's have a 3-month peace agreement. There were 3 months of no fighting, but during those 3 months, the Germans were arming the Croats, and they used those 3 months to buy time to strengthen the Croats against Yugoslavia. It's almost a mirror image of what happened in Ukraine. Euromaidan, a war. You had the Minsk Agreement, and the Minsk Agreement was deception. It was a deceptive tactic. Now, it reminds me of something that happened. I mean, I have to go back to ancient history here. I have to go back to ancient history because the Germans have been playing this tactic for thousands of years, it seems. There were these tribes, these German tribes, thousands of years ago, who fought against Julius Caesar in Gaul. They were called the Usipetes and the Tencteri. These two Germanic tribes were at war against the Romans, but they were very strategic about it. So they had a peace agreement with Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar honored the peace agreement, and the Romans did not attack these Germanic tribes. So then one day, a force of Roman soldiers, we're talking around 8,000 or so Roman soldiers, were marching, and they were attacked by these very Germanic tribes who had agreed with Julius Caesar to maintain peace. And they killed 75 Roman soldiers. Then, continuing their tactic of deception, they sent a group of ambassadors. They sent an envoy of ambassadors to Julius Caesar to apologize for the attack and to tell Julius Caesar that they had nothing to do with it. So the envoys came to Julius Caesar and they were like, "Oh, Julius, we're so sorry." And Julius Caesar knew exactly what they were up to. It was deception. They were trying to deceive Julius Caesar to buy time to strengthen themselves and prepare for an even bigger ambush on the Roman military. And Julius Caesar had those envoys arrested, and he went to war against these Germanic tribes. So you see the continuation of this tactic of deception, this trickiness. And in the midst of this deception, one really has to wonder, for thousands of years, people have been playing this game. For thousands of years, people have been killing each other. For thousands of years, people have been trying to exterminate their neighbors, enslave their neighbors. And it's all sort of surreal to me because life is so short and people waste it on killing one another. Life is so short and people waste it on hating their neighbors and trying to exterminate their neighbors. And you would think that the reality of death would make people peaceful, but it doesn't. It doesn't. The reality of death doesn't even faze them because I don't think they really even ponder on the shortness of life because they're so obsessed with gaining power here on Earth. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.